Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to talk to you about the GOAT, the so-called greatest of all time in tennis. It's a little bit of a controversial topic but also a very popular topic lately, especially since many people say in today's era of tennis we have the three greatest players of all time still playing in parallel, namely Novak Djokovic, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. A few years ago, to be more precise, exactly in February 2012, the Tennis Channel has done a show on this, a four-part series, I think, 4 or 5 part series, on the greatest tennis players of all time, the 100 greatest tennis players of all time. And it was interesting that they have mixed together the men's and the women's game. And at the top 6 players they've nominated back then in 2012, Rafa Nadal was at place 6, Pete Sampras was on 5, Martina Navratilova was on 4, Steffi Graf was on 3, Rod Laver was on 4, and Roger Federer was put at number 1. At that time, Novak Djokovic has had one phenomenal season and was the winner of 4 Grand Slam titles, or 5 Grand Slam titles, because he won 2012 Australian Open as well. So he was placed in the list of the first 100, but back then he was placed at number 40.
So why do this? Why drop the gloves and step right in the middle of a hockey fight between facts and opinions and help turn tennis into the worldwide phenomenon it is today? Now, we knew this was going to be a very difficult task, but in the spirit of sports and competition, we pressed on. So how tough was it? Tougher than 10 stitches in your face during a hockey game tough. Don't believe us? Then let's hear from the legends themselves.
It's very difficult to say in ladies and men's who the greatest of all time is.
I don't think you can judge who was the best ever. How can you say, well, Laver was better than Federer, or vice versa?
Well, because I think we had amateurs in the beginning and then professionals later on, that professionals couldn't always play when they wanted to.
It's really impossible, really, for me personally to say, I think this one's the greatest of all time. You can only be the best in your own time.
Tennis is one big cycle. There's always going to be someone that replaces you, no matter how great you were.
It'd be very interesting today to have that show done again, or at least in a few years' time done again, when all 3 players are done and basically their playing career is over, because then you could maybe measure it a little bit more objectively. On the other hand, what the Tennis Channel was emphasizing, and what I also agree with very much, it's very difficult to talk about the GOAT, the greatest of all time, because many things during the years, the decades and even the centuries now, have changed in tennis, starting from surface to racket technology to training methods, training techniques. The impact is incredible. If you just hit on YouTube and you look up a match from the 1960s or 1970s, which you can find in reasonably good quality, you will be amazed if you compare it to something like end of the 80s, how different it is. And then especially if you compare it with 90s, mid-90s, end of 90s. And then when Roger Federer started to dominate early 2000s until the end of the 2010s. So even tennis, how it used to be 10 years ago, it's very much not what it was a few years back. If we consider that we need to measure greatness in people winning how many slams, that's again a very difficult thing, because there was the time in the 60s when there was the Australian golden generation of Lou Holt, Ken Rosewall, Tony Roach and Rod Laver especially, and these players were really dominating and were so good they were excluded from 6, 7, 8 years of Grand Slam titles. When they turned pro, they couldn't play slams. So imagine Lever has won the Grand Slam twice, 1962 and 1969, but he didn't compete between 1963 and 1968. So that's a very much considerable amount of Grand Slams he didn't participate in. Could have or should have he played back then, his tally would definitely look quite different. Maybe he would have 18 tiny slams, something like Djokovic, Nadal and Federer have today. And at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, when Sampras has won at the 2002, his 14th Grand Slam title, which was a record back then, that probably would not even have been considered a record, because Lever would have had more. And another thing, considering the fact that the Australian Open wasn't really it started to be a very prominent tournament in the late 80s, actually. Even though it was considered a slam, a major tournament, but still, given the fact that travelling was even a little bit more difficult back then, and the scheduling of the Australian Open was quite different. It was played during Christmas time and during New Year's Eve. Many big stars, players, have not made a trip down under to play the Aussie Open. So if you would think of John McEnroe, for instance, who's been playing in the 80s and the late 70s and 80s mostly, he didn't really prioritise the Australian Open. He's not been there too many times in his career. Jimmy Connors himself, he's played it twice. He's been twice in the final and he's won it once. So, given the fact that the players today have prioritised the Australian Open more, it's somehow the chance to win more slams is even higher. So basically what you can think is, okay, back then players played mostly 3 slams a year, not 4. And today this is quite different. Even Pete Sampras was not somebody who prioritized the Australian Open as much as he did Wimbledon or US Open. When you hear him talk and the way he approached the tournaments, of course the Aussie Open was important for him, but he skipped it a few times. Can you imagine Roger Federer wanting to skip the Australian Open today, or Novak Djokovic for that matter, or even Rafa Nadal? No, they would never think of skipping the Aussie Open. It's become a super integral part of the Slam family as any other of the other 3 slams. Alright, having said that, since we talk about new technology, new training methods, new techniques in staying in the game and having longevity in the game of tennis, and if we would say, as tennis got along throughout the years, it's become more and more competitive, then you would have to say if the players who play today and have the most Grand Slam titles, and with this fierce competition going on in the modern game, and they're still winning the most titles, that would be a very strong argument to say, alright, these guys are probably really the best. But then if you would try to break it down, who's the best really of the 3, Federer, Djokovic and Nadal, that would be a very, very difficult thing to do. It seems that Roger Federer is the most dominant on grass. He's won Wimbledon 8 times. He's been in 12 finals. So he has the most impressive record on grass at Wimbledon. Novak Djokovic has been 8 times in the Australian Open final and he's won 8. So he's the absolute most dominant player at the Aussie Open with the most titles there. And Rafa Nadal is the one with the most titles at the French Open. He has 12 titles at the French Open on clay, of course. So you can argue about the fact whether playing tennis on grass is the real tennis, or playing tennis on a slow court like clay is the real tennis. Different preferences. Of course, if you have a big game, a solid serve, you're good at the net, very good at the net. You're a flat-out attacking player, probably grass or a hard court would suit you more. If you can be more of a grinder and you're fantastic with the defense you have, clays probably suit you more and better. I think tennis is a beautiful sport, and it is complete because there are these differences in surfaces, and we have the hard court, we have the clay court, and we have the grass. That's what makes it even so special. So if you would break it down from a slam count, with Nadal having 12 Grand Slam tournaments at the French and the other 7 coming on different surfaces. He's won the Australian Open once, he's won the US Open 4 times, and Wimbledon twice. That's a pretty good record. Djokovic has won 8 Aussie Opens, and he has 11 others. From those, 5 came at Wimbledon, 1 came at the French Open, and the rest is US Open titles. So Federer, he has 8 Wimbledons, 5 US Opens, 6 Australian Opens, and 1 French Open. So if we look at it like that, Nadal has only 1 slam where the tournament is played on his favorite surface, clay. From there he has 12 victories, but overall he has 19. So he's the one who had to win the most on surfaces which are not his favorite surface. So considering that, that's a very strong indication how strong Rafa is. Federer has the best distribution of Grand Slams won, with the exception of the French Open, because there he's won only once. But as I said before, he's won the US Open 5 times, Australian Open 6 times, and Wimbledon 8 times. It's very impressive. With Djokovic, he has also a very good distribution outside of the Aussie Open, because he's won, as I said before, 5 Wimbledon titles and 1 French Open only, and he has 3 US Open titles. And then again, the number of weeks spent at number 1. Right now, Roger Federer is leading, Djokovic is in 2nd place, and Nadal in 3rd. Each player has managed to get over the mark of 200 weeks. Federer is at 325 on 310 weeks on top. There's also Sampras, who's retired, and he has 286 weeks as number 1. So that's also very, very impressive. Something else you could think of is maybe number of tournaments won or number of matches won. Federer is in the lead with the most matches played, the most matches won. He's well above 1,000 matches. Nadal is very close to the 1,000 mark. Djokovic has recently passed the 900 mark. So this is really, for me, all these numbers and wins are so incredibly impressive that I don't really think it's that big of a differentiator anymore. One thing that's been put a lot of emphasis on in the last few years is the number of Masters tournaments won. That's the 2nd biggest league, next to the Grand Slams. Novak Djokovic is the only player ever who's managed to win all of them on all different surfaces at least once. Nadal has the biggest number of Masters won at 35, but Djokovic is the only one at 34 who's won all of them. So ultimately, I think each of these guys is super impressive, absolutely staggering performances, and I'm so happy that they're still playing. One thing that may stand out, as Bud Collins was talking about Ken Rosewall.
You know, you could make an argument that Rosewall was the greatest player of all time because he was still winning titles in his 40s.
There is no player ever who has had the longevity that he had.
His first Wimbledon final, for example, was 1954, and his last was 74. And he won the U.S. championships 14 years apart, 1956 and 1970. To be in the finals of the two biggest tournaments as he was in 74, losing both to Connors when he's 39 years old, speaks for itself.
And he's been the most impressive guy from a longevity perspective. It seems that if Roger goes on and plays a few more years and still is going to make Grand Slam finals or maybe even win some, then he's going to be right up there with Ken Rosewall, who's won his... who's had Grand Slam final appearances with 20 years apart, which is absolutely staggering. And then again, it's going to be interesting that even if at the age of 39, 40, 41, Roger Federer is going to retire, for how long is Nadal and Djokovic going to continue to play? Are they going to be so successful as Roger? Because Roger's won at the age of 35 and 36 Grand Slam titles. So he's won 2 at 35 and 1 at 36. Is Djokovic and Nadal also going to win a few more at 35 or 36? That's also a factor we need to consider when we talk about the GOAT and longevity. And there's something else that Maria Sharapova said, that no matter how good you were at some point, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be better, who's going to crack your record. It's an if game, and it's not really relevant all the time, but it's still interesting to have the conversation. If Rod Laver, for instance, would have had 17 Grand Slams, for instance, because he would have been allowed to play during 1963 and 1968 at the Slams, when Sampras was chasing him, wouldn't he have played longer? Wouldn't he have won 17 Slams as well? Would he have won maybe 18 Slams? Given the fact that Roger got ahead and he was at 17 at the age of 30, 31, when he's won Wimbledon in 2012, he was close to 31. That number at 17 looked like untouchable, and that was only 8 years ago. And today, Djokovic has caught up with him, and he is today right now at 17. Nadal has surpassed it, and he's at 19. So Federer probably pushed himself even more because he felt that, yeah, this is a record he's proud of. If he thinks he can win a few more, he wants to demonstrate that he's the best, and he can be considered the best. And he's won 3 more at 35 and 36, so that's super impressive. But the target now is 20. If somebody has done the 20, that means that is a number that humanly is achievable, and it's possible to make the number 20. The target for Rafa and for Djokovic is right there. So they know what they have to do to get to the number which is going to help them break a record or equal a record. It's always different when you chase a record, because you know somebody has done it before, and then most probably you can do it as well. Right now it seems that if Djokovic is going to play as well as he's been playing in the last 2 years, and he's most probably going to break the record, but you never know what's going to happen. And even if he does break it, you have the impression that record is going to stand for a long time. We had the same feeling when Sampras was along and he's won 14. We thought, oh god, that record, it's not going to be broken. At least not in our lifetime. Then Federer comes along, beats the record. He's beaten Sampras' record in how many years? He's done it in 7 years. Because Sampras has won his last in 2002. And Federer reached his 15 in 2009 at Wimbledon. So just in 7 years, a record's been broken, which we thought is not going to be broken in our lifetime. And then, after 2009, he wins a few more, and in 2018, he's already at 20. And then Nadal comes along and Djokovic come along, and they're probably going to surpass Federer's record. I'm not saying even if Djokovic gets to number 21 or 22, that record is going to be equaled in 7 years, but I wouldn't really count on the fact that that record's not going to be broken again in our lifetime, because if we've learned something from the past, if we look at Sampras' record, Federer's record, which are on the path to be broken, then it's really not safe to assume that Djokovic's or Nadal's record or whoever is going to end up on top is not going to be broken again. But nevertheless, this is a conversation to have. It's an interesting topic. It's a good debate to have. I'm really curious to see what do you think. Who do you think is the greatest of all time? Please comment below. Tell me your opinion. I'm trying not to be biased here. I'm not saying that one of these guys is my favorite. I don't want to have trash talk in the comment section, but I'm really curious to see and to hear your opinion. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.
The argument greatest of all time will probably go on.